Hi, this is Kimberly. Welcome to the Inward Vessel. This year for Come Follow Me, we're going to be talking about how weird the Old Testament is. I am not an expert in anything. I don't have any degrees. I don't have any publications. I don't have any expertise. There are plenty of people who do, and we will link to some of the best resources down below. But for me, I'm just a person reading the scriptures. And the question every week is going to be, why is the Old Testament so weird? And how can we learn something that benefits our life anyway? So today we're talking about Moses chapter 7. This one's not quite as bad as some of the Genesis and Exodus chapters are going to be, because at least it is a revelation from Joseph Smith that makes more sense. It's not as weird as some of the stuff we're going to see later on, but it's still a little bit weird. So this week we're talking about blackness in the seed of Cain and the devil with a chain around the earth. And the things that make us wonder what's really, really going on. Again, I am not the expert, but I did learn something from Taylor Halverson about blackness. Most ancient languages, they didn't have as rich a color vocabulary as we have in our modern societies. And languages, when they first developed color words, their first two colors were always black and white. And if they added a third color, it was always red. There are no exceptions there. So when we see black and white in the scriptures, in any ancient text, frankly, we have to be real careful about not assuming it means anything other than it means. Because they didn't tend to have color words, black and white generally meant something other than color. Generally, they meant things like covenantally loyal, or in the context of the Old Testament, faithful to the covenant, or righteous, or keeping the law of Moses. And black and blackness almost always refer to wickedness, rejecting the covenant, turning away from God. We see the same thing in the Book of Mormon. If you check in the Book of Mormon and you look up the words white and black, the first time you see them is very clearly in 1 Nephi in the context of wickedness versus righteousness, where people are described as white if they are being righteous, and they are described as black if they are being wicked. And that's the entire context of that word. We're going to link some more people down below who have more to say about that and have more knowledge about ancient societies. But the blackness that came upon Cain was the curse of being separated from God. And the descendants of Cain who were black, again, were black because they were not in the covenant with God. That is what it means. That's why they didn't have association with the other descendants of Adam. It was because they had removed themselves from the covenant with God. And that's all that means. So don't get hung up. But to get back to Moses 7, the main thing that happens here is a long vision that Enoch has where the Lord shows him the earth. And they have this very interesting exchange about the wickedness of the earth, wherein God says that people at the time of Enoch, outside of Enoch's city, obviously, were more wicked than any group of people he had ever created across all of his creations and multiple earths. They were the most wicked. Sometimes when we read about wickedness in the scriptures, we tend to think of the sort of primary examples of what wickedness is. If you ask the kids in primary to think of a sin, they always say drinking or smoking or saying bad words. And we tend to think that when God destroys people in the scriptures, he's being mean because he's destroying people who smoke or drink. That is not what is going on here. God says they are the most wicked people that had ever lived on earth, and we live in a world where people conscript child soldiers. And they were worse than that, whatever it was. So we have to bear that in mind. That's the kind of level of wickedness that God's dealing with. Aside from the way it kind of always sounds weird to us when we're reading ancient prophets' reports of their visions, what's most interesting to me, and what I think anyone can take from Moses chapter 7, even if they aren't experts in ancient languages, is that the Lord tells Enoch that he is sad because of the people who have to be destroyed. He's sad that they suffer. And he goes back and forth with Enoch asking, when are things going to get better? And the Lord shows something a little bit better, and then it goes back again to wickedness again. The earth mourns, Christ comes, but then there's wickedness again, and so on. And this, I think, speaks to the heart of what it means to be a human being, especially in today's world. we see so much sorrow and sadness, and most of it we can't do anything about. And we learn from this that God feels the same way we do. He is also sad. He is also heartbroken by the wickedness and the evil and the lack of affection that we see in our world today. It breaks his heart and makes him weep. But that's not where it ends. The Lord shows Enoch the entire plan of salvation, all the way to the end of the world after Christ has been resurrected, has come back, has reigned over the world for 1,000 years. And this is what they say at the very end. The Lord showed Enoch all things, even unto the end of the world. And he saw the day of the righteous, the hour of their redemption, and received a fullness of joy. That's the end of the vision. God weeps, yes, but his plan, in the end, when we see it through to the end, we're going to receive a fullness of joy. A fullness of joy. We won't remember the sorrow. We won't remember the tears. The whole point of the plan of salvation is that we end up with not just joy, not just happiness, but a fullness. This is a message we can take from Moses chapter 7. So as you prayerfully read Moses chapter 7 this week, take a moment to pause and ponder on the greatness of the plan that ends up in fullness of joy for anyone who is willing to accept repentance and turn to the Lord. Thank you so much for joining me on Pause and Ponder, and I'll see you next week. Bye.